those people slept better at night and enhanced their health.
I think it's so funny that you bring up sunlight and movement because this is a common thing among our podcast and a lot of people we brought onto the podcast.
So
It's this
much.
common theme of if you want to make your life better, go out on a walk, get some sunlight in your eyes, and get some movement. And
It's crazy.
it's so simple, but it's like it's going back to kind of like what we're talking about. It's just the simplest things that can make the largest difference. And really, it's if you do it just one day, it might not make that big of a difference. But like it's the consistency of doing it over and over and making it a habit that all of a sudden you're building this new life and you're experiencing so much more well-being because of it. So I think it's a
true.
fantastic point to bring up.
It's true. It's true. And also going out and walking in nature.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in the book, in the environment chapter, that being in nature, looking at nature is very important for well-being. And there are many elements of being in a natural green forest environment, for example, that confer the sense of well-being, besides walking slowly and breathing deeply, which is kind of like a walking meditation. But there's also the green light. It turns out that green light reduces pain. There's
Wow.
a professor at the University of Arizona, Mohab Ibrahim, who's discovered this and looking. And you can look at a LED green light, and it turns out that will reduce pain if
That's
you do that on
incredible.
a regular. Yeah.
So I do have a question. So this is anyone that's watched this show knows that I'm a massive fan. This is the segment of the show. This is the segment of the show. Everyone that's watched this show knows that I'm a huge fan of Andrew Huberman. Recently, he had a reel where he's talking about studies about nature, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. But like that, it's so hard to conduct a proper experiment about the benefits of nature because there are so many confounding variables, right? Where it's like,
Right.
okay, we're going to see if the negative ions that come from this waterfall are the thing that actually make you better. But then, it's like, all right, well, how do we actually make this experiment? We're going to put these people in a room and we're going to release negative ions and, do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, at that point, you lose so many of these other beneficial elements
Right.
that are in
Right.
nature that it's like, how do you really like make that down? So, but that being said, it's really cool to see that they were able to get it down to like this very narrow thing with like green light. Like essentially, green light can reduce pain.
There are two kinds of questions to ask in medical research.
Yeah.
One is whether something has a benefit, and the other is how does it work?
Mm.
And asking whether something has a benefit, you put people in nature and you see, how they are. We did a study when I was at NIH, and we're actually continuing it with the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, that used to be the Navy hospital. And it's a military base, and it's a large, like a small town basically. And there is a branch of the Rock Creek and a forest glen that runs through it. And we worked with architects, designers, the Navy, to retrofit this forest glen so that the wounded warriors could walk from where they were living, the Fisher houses, through the forest instead of
wow.
along an urban path, which was very noisy and lots of
Yeah.
trucks and
Of
stuff.
course.
And there's no question that walking in the forest glen reduced their stress subjectively and also objectively
Yeah.
as compared to the urban path. So that's not asking how did the forest glen reduce their stress. It's just saying it did it.
Yeah.
Then if you want to ask the question, what were the elements that did it, that gets harder because
Yeah.
of what you just said.
There's
Right.
just
You
hundreds
have
of
to
elements that
dissect.
it could be. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But the other elements that are present in the forest are volatile organic compounds. So before a rain, you can smell that wonderful fragrance.
Petrichor. I think that's the word.
Petrichor. That's
Petrichor.
petrichor.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
had
word.
no idea.
Yeah, and in Tucson, when I first came here in the monsoon season, I said, "What is that sweet smell in the air?" And it's the desert has its own. The desert has its own fragrance.
It's a wonderful thing.
It's a wonderful thing, and it turns out that the compounds, there are hundreds and hundreds of these compounds in the air just before a rain, because they dissolve from the plants in the water and they get volatilized, they get vaporized. And they're the same set of compounds in the Korean and Japanese forests as in the desert in Tucson.
Wow.
And
Wow.
in Japan and Korea, there's a tradition called forest bathing, which doesn't mean you're taking a bath in the forest. It
Mm-hmm.
means you're taking a walk and slowly inhaling and breathing deeply and being present. And probably the fact that there are these organic compounds that we know have beneficial effects on mood, on inflammation, and on stress is helping you to feel better as well. So you have the light, you also have the sounds, you have the birds chirping and nature sounds, which are calming and can help you sleep.
Yeah. I remember when I heard some research just earlier this year about just the effect of listening to birdsong and how it could boost your mood up to 8 hours. And up until that time, as soon as there was warm weather, I'd always be on my back patio to start my morning. It's one of my favorite spaces still. It's talking about the version of Adirondack chair.
Yeah.
My version of that is my hammock chair.
Oh, yeah.
With the wheat field behind me and the view to the west. But anyway, it blew my mind because I didn't realize I really did enjoy so much the bird song in the morning, and there's always been this hawk that has always nested in these trees every single year, and there's 2 of them, and I can even hear the babies once they've
Oh,
hatched.
that's awesome.
That's
And
so sweet.
I just assumed I was just being outside, which likely was part of it. It's the sunshine, it's the other things, but it never even occurred to me that just the bird song was having such a big impact
Yeah.
on how I was feeling.
I'm going to tell you a little story here that I tell in this book and also in my previous book, In Healing Spaces. I would sit just like you described have breakfast on your terrace. When I was a child, my father used to love to have breakfast on the terrace in Montreal. We were
Oh, I love that.
in Montreal, and when not during the winter, but when the weather was fine, every morning we would sit and he'd have his coffee, and I'd be getting ready for school and having breakfast. And this was 10 years after World War II, and he had been in a concentration camp in Russia in World War II. And he would tell me, he'd stop and he'd look up, and I remember the look on his face, and he'd say, listen to the sounds of peace. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I heard a dog barking. I heard the
I just
birds
got
chirping.
goosebumps.
I'm tearing up a little
I
bit,
just got
actually.
goosebumps. Yeah.
And, I'd hear the tennis balls on the tennis courts across the street, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And I didn't know at that time that he had been in a concentration camp. Wow. We discovered that only after he died. And then I understood. He was so valuing the sounds of peace that to me were just background noise. And in fact, he really taught me to pay attention to those things. And that is mindfulness meditation. It really is. And it can set you, and I talk about this in the chapter on spirituality in the book, that it sets your tone of your stress and relaxation response from the beginning of the day. You don't want to start the day stressed, because then you're going to only get more stressed.
Right, in reactive mode.
Right. So it settles you, it centers you. I tell the story also in the book of a colleague, Dr. Rocky Crocker, who's a physician at the center, and his grandmother was Choctaw, and he describes the ritual, the ceremony of gratitude that he starts the day with, which is a Choctaw, Native American tradition of you stand quietly and you look to the east and the west and the north and the south, and you feel gratitude for everything around you. And gratitude is a really important piece of this sense of spirituality, which can be brought into the workplace without it having a religious connotation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have a question for you, kind of going back to your book. But first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that story of your father. I just felt so, I'm emotional about it. I felt so moved by it. And what a beautiful reminder of presence. And so much, to know that you were unaware of that until after his death, and to be able to look back and hold that memory with the awareness of what he'd been through and how he was able to be there with you and to draw you into the moment, and how impactful that must have been for your life. So I just wanted to say gratitude. Thank you.